Calls for peace now sound extremely deceitful from many, as the West somehow decided that security is not for everyone. Terror has become a method of the elites in big politics. One example is the sabotage of the Nord Streams. And despite the enormous damage, no one in the EU is in a hurry to find the perpetrators and those who ordered it. Russia, which is not allowed to participate in the investigation, believes that the US is behind it all, while Europe obediently follows Washington's will and tries to blame Ukraine. A report by Yevgeny Belousov on a crime without punishment.
2 years after the Nord Stream explosions, there is still no clarity about what happened. Western countries actively cover for the US, and Germany even convinced itself that Ukrainians, or possibly Poles, were behind it all. For example, Spiegel came out with the sensation of the century, continuing its myth-making mission. Allegedly, Ukrainian civil activists blew up the pipeline for just $300,000, and Biden and Zelensky knew nothing. But it's hard to believe all this. None of the versions seem plausible enough, and sometimes, yes, it even looks more like a farce. It's also outrageous that after 2 years, no one is saying anything. No serious investigation has been conducted. The so-called investigation is more like jokes or a tragedy. If a real serious investigation had been conducted, there should have been some result by now. What's happening is unserious and outrageous. It shouldn't be this way. I mean, what impression does this create of a continent that allows such things to happen without any consequences? In fact, there are consequences. Left without cheap gas, the EU has experienced a steady decline in economic indicators. The voluntary refusal of Russian blue fuel through other routes added instability to this issue. In the end, the bravado ended along with the fizzle in the gas storage facilities. It turned out that buying gas from other countries is much more expensive. The German industry felt the impact first and foremost.
But our party, first and foremost, and exclusively even, is aimed at the national interests of Germany. We simply understand that Germany's national interests include good relations with Russia, ending the war in Ukraine and peace negotiations, and the supply of cheap gas from Russia, on which all of Germany's economic development of the last half-century is based.
And here, it should be noted that Russia never refused the energy union. They are always ready to resume supplies. But justice must also exist. Despite being excluded from participating in the international investigation and sabotage, they continue their own. State Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin is confident that Washington and Biden personally are behind the explosions on the Russian pipelines, no matter how others try to cover for him.
Washington and Biden personally are behind the Nord Stream explosions. It was beneficial for him to deprive Western Europe of cheap Russian gas, forcing them to buy it from the US at a high price. Germany suffered the most, the economy fell into recession, GDP decreased, the production model was broken, industrial production decreased, and the number of bankruptcies in the country became a record for the last decades. Gas today costs German citizens 84% more than before. It turns out that it was not Washington that paid for the Nord Stream terror attack, but the residents of Germany, whom Biden and Scholz reached into their pockets.
Of course, in Berlin, they understand, or at least pretend to understand, that the sabotage destroyed everything the country had been working towards since World War II. Recently, Scholz called on the German Federal Prosecutor's Office to conduct an impartial investigation. The Chancellor called the sabotage a terrorist act and emphasized that those responsible must be held accountable. Before that, the Germans blamed some Ukrainian diving instructor for all the sins. Meanwhile, according to media reports, he moved from Germany to Poland, from where he then fled under extremely strange circumstances.
In fact, it's quite clear that Ukraine and Poland are surfacing here. Judging by the investigation results, it seems a Ukrainian team was involved. And of course, such sabotage could only be carried out with support from the shore. If we look at the map, we'll see that the ship started from Lubmin. It's quite obvious that Polish agencies were involved here. And I think not only agencies, it was an agreement between the highest echelons of power in Ukraine and Poland.
By the way, such accusations almost led to a diplomatic scandal between Germany and Poland. Tusk was so offended that he cancelled his trip to Germany for the M100 Media Award. And Scholz, who was supposed to give a laudatory speech in honor of the Pole, also did not attend. And the introduction of border control by the Germans with their neighbors seems to have happened not because of the influx of extremist migrants, but to prevent any Ukrainian saboteurs from escaping justice.
We want to reduce illegal migration. To this end, we are taking further steps that go beyond existing comprehensive measures. Until we achieve reliable protection of the EU's external borders with a new pan-European asylum system, we need to strengthen control at our national borders. These control measures will also allow for effective enforcement of returns.
Thus, the Nord Streams not only destroyed the EU's economy, but also estranged once friendly neighbors. But most importantly, one of the pipeline branches remains intact and operational. And although Russia currently cannot service it, it can remain in this state for several decades. And gas can be launched at any moment. We just have to wait for Germany to wake up and start thinking about its citizens' wallets, not Washington's benefit. If not under Schultz, then under someone else. Yevgeny Belousov, Mikhail Kuznetsov, Drugakov, First